The security alarm screamed through every corridor of the wildlife preserve. Director Haven ran faster than his old legs had moved in years. His scaled hands fumbling with his communication device. Behind him, 3 security officers struggled to keep pace while checking their weapons. Nightshade was gone. The most dangerous creature in the entire facility had simply vanished from a reinforced habitat sometime during the night shift. Haven felt his stomach twist as he reached the empty enclosure and stared through the transparent barrier. The massive space looked untouched. No damage to the walls. No signs of struggle. The locks showed no tampering. It was as if the creature had simply decided to leave and the facility had politely opened the door for her. How is this possible? Have whispered, pressing his forehead against the cool barrier. His reflection stared back at him, fear clear in his large yellow eyes. Security Chief Dan clicked his mandibles together nervously. The insect-like alien adjusted his weapon and studied the control panel beside the habitat door. The locks disengage from the inside. The system shows a manual override command, but that requires an access code that only 3 people have. I didn't release her. Haven't said quickly. Did you? No. Director then who having pulled up the access logs on his device only 3 codes could override the habitat locks his own Drens and a head veterinarian Dr. Urus. None of them had been used yet. Somehow the door had opened a doctor. Yara arrived moments later, her breathing heavy from running. The tall, thin alien had 4 arms and used all of them to pull up data on her own device. I was monitoring her vitals remotely last night. Around midnight, her stress levels spiked dramatically. Heart rate increased. Body temperature rose. All signs of severe agitation. Why didn't you alert anyone? Din demanded. Because 30 minutes later, everything normalized. Better than normal. Actually, she appeared to have calmed completely. I assumed it was a passing episode. Yara's voice cracked slightly. I should have come to check on her. Haven't shook his head. We have bigger problems. There are over 200 visiting students on this station. Alien dignitaries sent their children here to learn about conservation. If Nightshade reaches the residential sections, he didn't need to finish the sentence. Everyone knew what a Vorus stalker could do. The species was legendary for its hunting ability. 6 legs gave it incredible speed. Retractable quills contained a paralytic venom. Worst of all, it could project a psychic field that triggered pure terror in nearby creatures. Most people would freeze in fear long before they could run. Nightshade had killed 3 handlers at previous facilities. Each time the staff had sworn they followed every safety protocol. Each time the creature had found a way through their defenses. Have had accepted her transfer only because the alternative was euthanasia. She was one of 47 of her kind left in the entire galaxy. Lock down all residential areas immediately. Haven ordered. Get the students into the central safe room. Full containment protocol. I want every available person searching the facility. Director Din said carefully. If we find her in an area with civilians, protocols require lethal force. Having closed his eyes, 47 left. Do what you must to protect lives. But if there's any way to take her alive, understood. The next 2 hours felt like days. Teams moved through the preserve with weapons ready and nerves stretched thin. The facility was massive with hundreds of habitats housing endangered species from across known space. Somewhere in that maze of corridors and environmental systems, a perfect predator was hiding. Reports came in steadily. Habitat 7 checked and clear. Environmental Section 3 checked and clear. Storage Bay 12 checked and clear. Each negative report made Have more anxious. Where was she? Director, we have a signal. Dren's voice crackled through the communication system. Biot tracker shows her in the lower maintenance levels near the waste processing systems. Is she moving? Negative. The signal is stationary. Has been for the last 20 minutes. Haven't felt a chill run through his body. Stationary meant she was either resting after a kill or waiting in ambush. I'm coming down there, sir. That's not safe. That creature is my responsibility. I'm coming. Having joined a security team in the lower levels. The maintenance areas were dim and cramped, filled with pipes and machinery, not a place for visitors. Only staff came down here and only when necessary. The air smelled of recycled water and industrial cleaner. The team moved slowly, weapons raised. Having stayed in the middle of the group, his heart pounding. The Bayat tracker led them deeper into the maze around one corner down a narrow passage through a door marked with maintenance symbols. Then they saw it in a small open area surrounded by tools and equipment. A human sat on the floor with his back against the wall. He wore the simple gray uniform of the groundskeeping staff. His eyes were closed and his head tilted back in a relaxed posture and curled against his chest like some enormous deadly pet was Nightshade. The Vorus stalker had all 6 legs tucked beneath her massive body. Her quills lay flat against her dark scales. Her head rested on the human shoulder. She was making a sound, a low rumbling that resonated through the quiet space. She was purring. Haven raised his hand, stopping everyone from moving. They stood frozen, weapons pointed at the impossible scene. The human's eyes opened slowly. He looked at the assembled team with complete calm. Then he raised one finger to his lips in a shushing gesture and carefully pointed at the sleeping predator against his chest. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The moment stretched out like elastic, ready to snap. Finally, haven't found his voice. It came out as barely a whisper. What did you do? Dennis Carver had worked maintenance on the wildlife preserve for 3 months without causing any trouble. He fixed broken equipment, cleaned environmental systems, and stayed out of everyone's way. That was exactly how he liked it. Quiet work in quiet places where nobody asked questions about his past. Then Nightshade found him. It happened during his midnight shift. Dennis was checking pressure valves in the lower levels when he heard something moving in the darkness behind him. He turned slowly, keeping his hands visible and his movements calm. Years of experience had taught him that sudden movements around predators were usually fatal. The Vor stalker emerged from the shadows like liquid night. She was even bigger than the photograph suggested, easily the size of an earth tiger, but longer and lower to the ground. Her 6 legs moved with perfect silence. The quills along her spine stood partially erect, catching the dim light. Dennis stayed very still. He watched her approach, reading her body language. The raised quills meant alertness, not aggression. Her ears were forward, indicating curiosity rather than hunting behavior. Her tail moved in slow sweeps, a sign of uncertainty. She was scared. The realization hit him immediately. This apex predator, this creature capable of killing him in seconds, was frightened and confused. Something had driven her from her habitat. Something had stressed her so badly that she'd found a way to escape. "Hey there," Dennis said softly. He didn't move toward her. He simply stood his ground and kept his voice low and calm. "Rough night." Nightshade stopped about 3 m away. Her head tilted slightly, studying him. Dennis felt a strange pressure in his skull, like the beginning of a headache. He recognized it from the safety briefings. This was her psychic intimidation field, the thing that made most creatures flee in terror. Dennis took a slow breath and pushed the feeling aside. Fear was natural. Panic was a choice. He'd learned that lesson on Dust Ridge when dealing with the native predators that stalked the colony's edges. The ones who panicked died quickly. The ones who stayed calm usually survived. "I'm just a maintenance guy," Dennis continued, keeping his tone conversational. "Not here to hurt you. Not here to chase you back to your cage either, if that's what you're worried about." He slowly lowered himself to sit on the floor, making himself smaller and less threatening. 1. Tell me what's wrong. Nightshade took a cautious step forward, then another. She approached him like a cat investigating something new. Alert and ready to bolt at any moment. Dennis remained perfectly still, letting her set the pace. She circled him twice, her nose nearly touching his shoulder as she investigated his scent. Dennis kept breathing slowly, keeping his hand relaxed on his knees. When she completed her second circle, she sat down in front of him, just out of reach. They stayed that way for several minutes. Dennis talked quietly about nothing important. The weather patterns he noticed in the environmental systems. The strange sounds of recycling pumps made. The lousy coffee in the staff break room. His voice was a constant soothing drone of meaningless human words. Gradually, Nightshade's quills lowered. Her posture relaxed. The pressure in Dennis's skull faded completely. "You're lonely," Dennis said quietly. "That's it, isn't it? Stuck in that habitat all by yourself. No one to talk to. No one who understands." He reached slowly into his pocket and pulled out a ration bar from his lunch pack. He broke off a piece and set it on the floor between them. "Not sure if you eat this stuff, but you're welcome to try." Nightshade sniffed the food carefully, then delicately picked it up with her front teeth. She chewed slowly, watching him the entire time. Dennis smiled. "Not bad, right? Tastes like cardboard, but it's food." He set the rest of the ration bar on the floor and leaned back against the wall. Nightshade finished her piece and moved closer to investigate the rest. As she ate, Dennis carefully extended his hand, palm up, letting her see it clearly. She glanced at his hand, then back at the food, then at his face. "It's okay," Dennis murmured. "I'm not going to grab you." Nightshade finished eating and sat down again. This time, she was close enough that Dennis could have touched her if he'd wanted to. He didn't. He waited. Patience was always the key with frightened animals. After another few minutes, Nightshade made a decision. She moved forward and pressed her massive head against Dennis's chest just for a moment, testing his reaction. When he remained calm and still, she circled once and lay down beside him. Her body curled partially around his legs. Dennis slowly lowered one hand to rest on her shoulder just behind her neck. Her scales were warm and smooth under his palm. "There you go," he whispered. "Not so bad, is it? Having someone nearby who's not afraid of you." Nightshade made a sound he'd never heard in any of the orientation videos. A low, rumbling purr that vibrated through her entire body. She shifted position and laid her head on his lap, looking up at him with eyes that no longer held any trace of fear or aggression. Dennis sat with her for hours, occasionally scratching behind the ridges where her ears attached to her skull. She seemed to like that. Eventually, exhaustion caught up with both of them. Dennis's eyes grew heavy. Nightshade was already half asleep. Her breathing deep and regular. He knew he should call someone. Report the situation. Get help. But the creature beside him was calm for the first time in who knew how long. She trusted him. If he called security now, they'd come with weapons and tranquilizers. They'd scare her, probably hurt her just a little longer, Dennis mumbled to himself. Let her rest a bit. That was when the security team found them. Dennis opened his eyes to see at least 6 weapons pointed at him in Nightshade. Director Haven stood in the middle of the group, his scaled face pale with shock. Behind him, other staff members stared like they were witnessing something impossible. Dennis raised his finger to his lips, gesturing for quiet. Nightshade stirred against him but didn't wake fully. Her purring continued, a steady rumble of contentment. "What did you do?" Have whispered. Dennis looked down at the deadly predator, using him as a pillow. He shrugged slightly. "I listened." The board meeting lasted 3 hours. Dennis sat in an uncomfortable chair while 12 different alien species argued about what to do with him. Some wanted him fired immediately. Others wanted to study him like a laboratory specimen. A few seemed to think he'd somehow drugged or manipulated Nightshade. Director Have-End, though Dennis could see the confusion in the old alien's eyes. Nobody understood what had happened in that maintenance corridor. Least of all Dennis himself. The human has no special training, one board member insisted, reviewing Dennis's file on a display screen. His resume shows basic groundskeeping experience. Some work on a frontier colony. Nothing that would explain an ability to calm a vor stalker. Perhaps that's exactly why it worked. Dr. Yar suggested she'd been studying Dennis since the incident, running scans and taking measurements. He didn't approach Nightshade with preconceptions about what she should be. He simply responded to what he observed. That's absurd. Vora stalkers have killed trained Xenopana experts. They're apex predators with no capacity for bonding. Dennis cleared his throat. Everyone turned to look at him. He shifted uncomfortably under their combined stare. With respect, maybe that's the problem. Everyone treats her like a monster. She's not. She's just an animal that's been kept alone in a box for years. She's dangerous. Another board member said flatly. So are lots of animals. Doesn't mean they're evil. Dennis thought about the creatures he dealt with on Dust Ridge. The massive tunnel bears that crushed mining equipment, the sky razors that dove at colonists from above. Every one of them was dangerous. Every one of them was just trying to survive. Nightshade was scared and lonely. She wanted company. That's not complicated. You make it sound simple. It is simple. People just overthink it. Dennis realized he was talking too much and forced himself to stop. He'd always been better with animals than people. People asked too many questions, haven't intervened before the board could continue their interrogation. Whatever the explanation, we have an immediate problem. Nightshade has become severely distressed since we returned her to the habitat. She's refusing food and showing signs of acute separation anxiety. Dr. Yara believes the stress could be life-threatening if it continues. Yara nodded, pulling up vital signs on her display. Her cortisol levels are extremely elevated. Heart rate is irregular. She paces constantly and vocalizes in distress patterns. In my professional opinion, forcibly separating her from Dennis may have caused significant psychological harm. So, what do you propose? That we let a maintenance worker live with a deadly predator? I propose we allow controlled contact while we study this phenomenon. Dennis has demonstrated an ability that could have profound implications for conservation efforts across the galaxy. Dennis wanted to protest. He didn't want to be studied. He didn't want implications. He just wanted to go back to fixing pipes and being left alone. But when Yara showed him the footage of Nightshade throwing herself against the habitat walls, crying out in distress, he couldn't say no. They established protocols. Dennis would spend 2 hours each day inside Nightshade's habitat while researchers monitored from behind protective barriers. Security teams would be stationed nearby with tranquilizer equipment. Every interaction would be recorded and analyzed. The first official session felt nothing like their meeting in the maintenance corridor. Nightshade was agitated when Dennis entered the habitat. She rushed toward him immediately, nearly knocking him over in her eagerness. Her quills were partially raised and her movements were jerky with stress. "Easy, girl," Dennis said softly, bracing himself against her weight. "I'm here. It's okay." Nightshade pressed against him, making anxious chirping sounds. Her whole body trembled. Dennis slowly lowered himself to sit on the habitat floor and she immediately curled around him, her head pushed firmly against his chest. "They scared you, didn't they?" Dennis murmured, scratching behind her ears. "All those weapons and shouting, I'm sorry about that. They're just afraid because they don't understand you." From behind the barrier, Yara's voice came through a speaker. "Dennis, can you describe what you're observing in her behavior?" Dennis studied Nightshade carefully. She's stressed. You can see in how she's holding her body. Muscles are all tense. Her breathing is too fast. She keeps checking the entrance like she thinks I'm going to leave again. He continued stroking her scales in slow, steady movements, but she's starting to calm down. See how her quills are lowering? That means she's feeling safer. How do you know these things? Same way you'd know if a person was scared or relaxed. Body language. It's not that different across species if you pay attention. Dennis had learned this the hard way. On Dust Ridge, reading animal behavior wasn't optional. It was survival. Most creatures signal their emotions pretty clearly. Humans just don't bother to learn the language. Over the following weeks, the sessions became routine. Dennis would enter the habitat and Nightshade would greet him with obvious joy. They'd spend time together while Yara took notes and ran tests. Sometimes they just sat quietly. Other times, Dennis would walk around the habitat and Nightshade would follow him like an enormous deadly shadow. The research team documented everything. They measured Nightshade's hormone levels before and after Dennis's visits. They analyzed his vocal patterns and movements. They mapped the ways he positioned his body around her. What they found surprised everyone except Dennis. He never made direct eye contact unless Nightshade initiated it. He kept his movements slow and predictable. He positioned himself lower than her whenever possible, reducing any perceived threat. Most importantly, he never stopped talking. His constant stream of quiet conversation seemed to soothe her in ways nothing else could. You treat her like a person, Yara observed during one session. Dennis shrugged. She's a person, just not a human one. She thinks and feels and wants things. That makes her a person in my book. Most people don't see it that way. Most people are wrong about a lot of things. The breakthrough came during a routine session when a maintenance crew began loud repairs in an adjacent corridor. The sudden noise startled Nightshade badly. Her quills shot up and she began pacing in aggressive patterns, her body coiled tight with tension. "Extraction team ready," Dren's voice announced over the speaker. "Wait," Dennis said firmly. He stayed seated on the floor and began humming an old Earth song his mother had taught him years ago. Just a simple melody with no words. Nightshade stopped pacing and turned toward him, her head tilted in confusion. Dennis kept humming, patting the floor beside him in invitation. After a long moment, Nightshade approached cautiously and laid down next to him. Her quills slowly lowered. Her breathing settled into a calmer rhythm. She wasn't aggressive, Dennis said quietly. She was frightened. There's a difference. Yara's voice held a note of wonder. You knew exactly what she needed. Of course I did. She told me. Dennis looked up at the observation window where the researchers watched. She always tells me, you just have to listen. The news spread through academic circles like wildfire. Other preserves and conservation facilities began contacting Haven, asking about the human who could calm apex predators. There was talk of a new field of study. Possibilities for helping endangered species previously considered too dangerous to handle. Dennis ignored most of it. He focused on Nightshade, making sure she was healthy and content. That was what mattered, not research papers or academic theories. Just one creature who'd been alone for too long finally finding a friend. Though he had to admit being called a friend by an apex predator was probably the strangest thing that had ever happened to him. And on Dust Ridge, he'd seen some very strange things. 3 weeks after the incident, everything changed in the span of 30 seconds that a solar flare hit the station's shields at an angle nobody had predicted. The electromagnetic pulse cascaded through the backup systems before the AI could compensate. Throughout the preserve, containment protocols failed. Habitat doors unlocked. Environmental barriers deactivated. Emergency lighting flickered on as alarms screamed warnings through every corridor. Dennis was in Nightshade's habitat when happened. The door slid open with a grinding sound and stayed open. Through the opening, he heard other doors opening throughout the facility. Distant roars and screeches echoed through the suddenly chaotic station. Nightshade leaped to her feet, quills fully extended. Her head swung toward the open door, nostrils flaring as she caught scents from beyond her usual territory. Every muscle in her body tense for action. Dennis stood slowly, keeping his voice calm despite the fear churning in his gut. "Easy, stay with me." She looked at him, then at the door, clearly torn between investigating the chaos and staying near him. "I know," Dennis said softly. "Everything's wrong. Lots of scared animals out there, but I need you to trust me, okay?" He moved toward the door carefully. Nightshade followed, pressing close to his side. The corridor beyond was already mayhem. Staff members ran past, shouting instructions into communication devices. Security teams rushed toward different sections with weapons drawn. Somewhere nearby, something large roared in confusion and rage. Dennis pulled out his own communication device and connected to the emergency channel. Habin's voice came through tight with stress. "All personnel evacuate to safe zones. I repeat, multiple containments have failed. We have at least 6 apex predators loose in the facility. Director, this is Dennis. I'm in Nightshade's section." Her door opened, "But she's with me. She's calm. Get to a safe zone immediately." "That's an order." Dennis looked down at Nightshade, then at the chaos unfolding around them. He thought about the visiting students locked somewhere in the residential sections. He thought about the staff members who'd never dealt with loose predators. He thought about what would happen if security teams cornered frightened animals with weapons drawn. "Director, I have a better idea. Let me help." "Absolutely not. You're a maintenance worker, not a security officer. I'm the only person on this station who these predators might actually listen to." Dennis started walking toward the sounds of distress. Nightshade keeping pace beside him. "You can order me to stop or you can let me try to prevent a massacre. Your choice." The silence on the other end lasted several seconds. Finally Haven spoke. "If you get yourself killed, I'm putting it in your permanent record." "Fair enough." Dennis followed the sounds of panic through the winding corridors. Nightshade stayed close, her body language alert, but not aggressive. She seemed to understand that something was wrong and that Dennis needed her cooperation. They found the first escape predator in a storage corridor. The Shade Serpent was a beautiful creature, nearly 6 m long with iridescent scales that shifted through multiple colors. Right now, those scales showed the bright red and black pattern that meant extreme agitation. The serpent had cornered a group of young aliens against a dead end. Its hood was fully extended and venom dripped from its fangs. Security teams approached from behind Dennis, weapons raised. "Don't shoot," Dennis said firmly. "You'll just make it worse." "It's going to kill those children," Dren insisted. "No, it's going to defend itself because it's terrified. There's a difference." Dennis studied the serpent's posture. The hood display was all threat. No actual intent to strike. The creature was backed into an emotional corner by circumstances it didn't understand. "Everyone put your weapons down and back up slowly." "That's insane." "Do it, please." Something in Dennis's tone made them obey. The security team lowered their weapons and retreated several steps. The serpent's hood lowered slightly, confusion replacing some of the aggression in its posture. Dennis sat down on the floor, making himself small and non-threatening. Nightshade, reading his intention, also lowered herself into a resting position. They waited. "What are you doing?" Dren whispered, showing it were not a threat. "Just wait." Long minutes passed. The young aliens trapped against the wall stayed frozen in fear. The serpent's hood gradually lowered further. Its aggressive coloring began to fade toward calmer blues and greens. It was still blocking the corridor, still preventing escape, but it was no longer actively threatening. Dennis began humming softly, the same tune he used with Nightshade. The serpent's head turned toward him, tongue flicking out to taste the air. Slowly, carefully, Dennis extended his hand palm up in a gesture of peace. "Nobody's going to hurt you," he said quietly. "You're lost and scared. I understand. But those kids over there are also scared. They're not your enemies. They're just babies who want to go home." The serpent moved its head in a slow weaving pattern, studying Dennis and Nightshade. Two apex predators sitting calmly, showing no aggression. After another long moment, the serpent's colors shifted to predominantly blue. "Calm, curious. That's it," Dennis murmured. "You're okay. We're all okay." Yara's voice came through the communication channel. "Dennis, the serpent's stress markers are dropping rapidly. Whatever you're doing, it's working." Dennis stayed seated, maintaining the calm presence. Eventually, the serpent moved away from the trapped children and approached Dennis instead. It circled him once, investigating, then slowly began moving down the corridor in the direction of its habitat. Handlers waiting at a safe distance quickly set up scent markers and food to guide it the rest of the way. The rescued children ran to safety. Dren stared at Dennis like he just witnessed a magic trick. "How did you know that would work?" "Because scared animals all act basically the same way. Human alien doesn't matter. Fear makes you defensive. Calm presence helps you settle." Dennis stood up and brushed off his uniform. "Where are the others?" They found the Thornback Ripper next. The massive armored creature had claimed the central plaza as territory and was defending it with aggressive displays against anyone who approached. It had injured 2 security officers before Dennis arrived. This one took longer. The Ripper was established in its claimed space and viewed any approach as an invasion. Dennis couldn't use the same tactic as before. Instead, he sat down at the very edge of the Ripper's territory and simply waited, showing submission to the creature's dominance over that space. Hours passed. Security teams wanted to use tranquilizers. Heaven wanted to authorize stronger measures. Dennis refused to move. He sat peacefully at the border, occasionally talking to Nightshade, but never challenging the Ripper's claim. Eventually, as the chaos in the station settled and things became quieter, the Ripper's aggression faded. It wasn't being threatened anymore. Its territory was secure. Handlers were able to bring familiar items from its habitat and gradually coax it back without confrontation. The last challenge was the Crimson Moes, a pack of 3 intelligent hunters who'd established themselves in the environmental systems. These creatures were coordinated and clever. Dennis couldn't approach them as individuals. "You need to take the lead on this one," Dennis told Nightshade softly. "Show them you're the apex here. But no fighting, understand, just dominance display." Nightshade seemed to understand. She approached the Crimson Moes with Dennis walking beside her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. The Moes recognized a superior predator when they saw one. There was a tense standoff, lots of posturing and low growls, but no actual violence. Eventually, the Moes backed down and allowed handlers to guide them away. When the crisis finally ended, Dennis sat in an empty corridor with Nightshade's head on his lap. His whole body shook with exhaustion and delayed fear. He'd been running on adrenaline for hours. "Haven't found him there." The director looked ancient and worn out. "You saved dozens of lives today, maybe hundreds." Dennis just nodded. Too tired to respond properly. "The board is going to want answers, explanations, protocols." Later, Dennis mumbled. "Right now, I just want to sit here with my friend," having looked at Nightshade, peacefully resting against the human who'd somehow changed everything they thought they knew about apex predators. "She really is your friend, isn't she?" "Yeah," Dennis said softly. "She really is." The Galactic news networks picked up the story within days. Video footage of Dennis walking through the chaos with Nightshade at his side spread across hundreds of worlds. Suddenly, the quiet maintenance worker who just wanted to be left alone was famous across half the galaxy. Dennis hated every second of it. Reporters tried to schedule interviews. Conservation organizations sent messages requesting his expertise. Academic institutions offered research positions. The preserve's communication system was overwhelmed with inquiries. Dennis ignored all of it and focused on his work, though his work had fundamentally changed, having called him to the administrative office 1 week after the containment failure. The director looked tired but determined. "The Galactic Conservation Council wants to meet with you. They're proposing something unprecedented." "I'm not interested in being famous," Dennis said immediately. "This isn't about fame. It's about saving lives." Having pulled up a display showing facilities across known space. Each one was marked with red indicators. These are conservation stations with apex predators considered unmanageable. Creatures declining in captivity because nobody can handle them properly. Some facilities are discussing euthanasia as the only option. Dennis studied the display. Dozens of red markers. Dozens of creatures like Nightshade. Alone and misunderstood. The council wants to establish a new program. Training specialists in apex predator psychology. Better habitat designs. Updated protocols based on actual animal behavior rather than fear. Haven't met Dennis's eyes. They want you to lead it. I'm not a leader. I'm a maintenance worker who happens to be good with animals. You're the human who prevented a massacre by understanding what frightened creatures needed. That's exactly the kind of thinking we need. Haven't pulled up more files, personnel reports, facility assessments, crisis logs. Every year, we lose endangered apex predators to stress, aggression, and containment failures. Staff members are injured or killed. The current system isn't working. You could change that. Dennis thought about Nightshade, about how close she'd come to being euthanized simply because nobody understood her. He thought about all those red markers on the display, each one representing a creature that deserved better. "I'd have to travel," Dennis said slowly. "Visit different facilities, train their staff. Yes, with full support and resources. You could bring Nightshade as a demonstration partner, show people what proper care looks like." "What about my past? Someone's going to dig into my background eventually. Ask questions about Dust Ridge." Heaven's expression softened. "I already know about Dust Ridge. I know what happened there. I know why you left." Dennis stiffened. He'd never told anyone the full story. The colony, the tunnel bear that had wandered too close to the settlement. The officials who ordered it killed despite Dennis's protest that it was just confused and could be guided away safely. His refusal to participate. The blacklist that followed that incident showed you have principles haven't continued. You stood up for a creature everyone else saw as a monster. That's exactly why you're the right person for this job. I failed. The bear died anyway. But you tried. That matters. Having closed the display. You don't have to decide right now. Take time to think about it. Talk it over with Nightshade if that helps. Dennis did exactly that. He sat in Nightshade's habitat that evening, his back against the warm wall while she dozed beside him. He talked through his fears and doubts, knowing she couldn't understand the words, but finding comfort in saying them aloud anyway. "They want me to be important," he told her quietly. "To travel around and fix things. Save creatures like you. But what if I fail again? What if I can't help them all?" Nightshade stirred and pressed her head against his chest, making a soft chirping sound. I know. Can't help everyone, but maybe I can help some." Dennis scratched behind her ears, feeling the tension in his own shoulders ease slightly. "You were alone for so long. If I could prevent that for others, maybe I should try." Over the next few days, Dennis watched Nightshade carefully. She was healthier now than when he'd first met her. Her scales had a better sheen. She moved with confident grace instead of agitated pacing. She played with her enrichment toys and showed curiosity about her environment. The difference was remarkable. That difference was entirely because someone had finally treated her like a living being instead of a dangerous object to be contained. Dennis made his decision. "I'll do it," he told. "But I have conditions. I won't be a celebrity. No interviews with press unless absolutely necessary. I work behind the scenes training staff and establishing protocols, and Nightshade comes with me everywhere." The council already assumed she would. "Her transformation is the strongest evidence we have that your methods work. One more thing, I want full authority to shut down any facility or program that's not meeting proper care standards. If I find places that are harming animals through negligence or cruelty, I need to be able to act." Haven smiled slightly. The council anticipated that request, too. "They're giving you exactly that authority. These creatures are too valuable to lose to poor management." The program launched 3 months later. Dennis found himself traveling to a remote facility on the edges of known space where a pack of predators called Voidstalkers had been deemed unmanageable. The facility director met him at the landing dock, clearly skeptical. "I've read the reports," the director said, looking at Nightshade with obvious nervousness, "but frankly, I doubt your methods will work here. Voidstalkers are more aggressive than Voidstalkers. They hunt in packs and coordinate their attacks. Have you considered that maybe aggression is a response to poor conditions?" Dennis asked mildly. "Our facility meets all galactic standards, standards written by people who see these creatures as threats instead of individuals." Dennis followed the director through the facility, observing everything. The habitats were technically adequate, temperature-controlled, properly sized, all the requirements checked off, but they were sterile, boring, isolating. "They're pack hunters," Dennis said, stopping in front of one habitat where a single void stalker paced endlessly. "Why are they kept in individual enclosures?" "For safety. They're too dangerous to house together." "They're dangerous because you're keeping them in solitary confinement. They're social creatures going insane from isolation." Dennis pulled out his data pad and started making notes. "We're going to redesign these habitats, create connected spaces where they can interact, add environmental enrichment, establish protocols for positive reinforcement training. That'll take months, cost significant resources, and it takes months. These animals deserve better." Dennis looked at the pacing Void Stalker, seeing the same loneliness he'd recognized in Nightshade. "They're not monsters. They're just frightened and alone." Over the following weeks, Dennis worked with the facility staff. He taught them to read body language, to recognize the difference between aggression and fear, to understand that patience was more effective than force. Slowly, the Void Stalkers began to change. The constant pacing decreased. They engaged with enrichment activities. When carefully introduced to each other in controlled settings, they formed bonds instead of fighting. The facility director admitted grudging respect. "I didn't think this would work. I was wrong. Most people are wrong about predators," Dennis said. "They see teeth and claws and assume malice. But every creature just wants to feel safe and understood." News of the Void Stalker success spread. More facilities requested Dennis's help. He traveled constantly, Nightshade always at his side. Everywhere they went, staff members were skeptical at first. Then they watched Dennis work. They saw him sit calmly with creatures that terrified everyone else. They observed how he turned aggressive animals into willing partners through patience and respect. The program grew. Other humans joined, trained by Dennis in his methods. Conservation standards across the galaxy began to shift. Mortality rates for captive apex predators dropped significantly. Several species that have been declining were now stabilizing. Dennis remained uncomfortable with the attention, but focused on the work. Each creature he helped was a small victory. Each facility he improved meant fewer animals suffering in isolation. And through it all, Nightshade stayed by his side, a reminder of where it had all started and why it mattered. 2 years after the containment failure that changed everything, Dennis stood in an observation room watching a young handler named Rena successfully calm an agitated ridgerunner. The massive predator had been stressed by medical procedures. But Rena used the techniques Dennis had taught her. Slow movements, patient waiting, calm voice. The ridger runner settled within minutes, allowing the medical team to complete their examinations safely. Nightshade lay beside Dennis, her head resting on his foot. She'd grown comfortable with these observation sessions. She understood that they were helping others learn. "She's good," Yara commented, standing beside Dennis. The veterinarian had become his closest colleague over the past 2 years, helping establish medical protocols that reduce stress for apex predators during necessary procedures. "You've trained her well. She's a natural. Some people will just have the instinct for this kind of work." Dennis made notes on his data pad. Renault would be ready to work independently soon. Another human joining the growing network of apex predator specialists across the galaxy. "Have you seen the latest statistics?" Ureo pulled up a display. Mortality rates for captive apex predators are down 43% compared to 2 years ago. Successful breeding programs have increased by 30%. Several species that were considered critically endangered are now listed as vulnerable instead. "Your program is working, Dennis." "It's not my program. It's just common sense applied properly." Dennis watched as Rena finished her session and gave the ridge runner an affectionate scratch behind its jaw ridges. The creature leaned into the touch, clearly enjoying the attention. People were always capable of this. They just needed permission to try. You gave them more than permission. You showed them it was possible. Yara, close the display. The council wants to expand the program again. They're proposing to establish apex predator sanctuaries on several worlds. Facilities specifically designed using your principles. Natural habitats with proper social structures. Dennis considered this. That would be expensive. Several governments are willing to fund it. Apparently, your work has changed public perception of conservation efforts. People across the galaxy are paying attention to how we treat endangered predators. Yara smiled slightly. You've become quite influential whether you like it or not. I don't like it, but if it helps the animals, I can tolerate being influential. They were interrupted by an urgent message. A facility 3 systems away was dealing with a crisis. A pair of bonded apex predators had been separated during transfer and both were in severe distress. The facility staff were requesting immediate assistance. "I'll go," Dennis said immediately. "Get this shuttle ready, Dennis. You just finished a 2E consultation at the Outer Rim. You need rest. Those predators need help more than I need sleep." Dennis stood and Nightshade rose with him, stretching her 6 legs. "Besides, she's getting restless. She likes to travel." They arrived at the facility within hours. The situation was worse than reported. The bonded predators called Star Hunters were destroying their individual habitats in attempts to reach each other. Both had injured themselves. Staff members were discussing sedation and permanent separation. Dennis assessed the situation quickly. Why were they separated in the first place? Protocol requires individual quarantine after transport, the facility manager explained. Standard procedure for preventing disease transmission. Standard procedure that doesn't account for bonded pairs who've never been apart. Dennis studied the Star Hunters through observation windows. Both creatures were magnificent with bioluminescent markings that pulsed in distress patterns. They're going to hurt themselves seriously if we don't reunite them soon. The quarantine period isn't complete. We could be risking contamination. You're definitely risking 2 lives if you keep them apart. Dennis pulled up the medical scans. Both animals were healthy. No signs of disease or parasites. The only problem was psychological trauma from forced separation. Override the quarantine. Put them together in a secure observation habitat. We can monitor them there just as effectively. The manager hesitated. That's against standard protocols. Your protocols are killing them. My authority from the Galactic Conservation Council overrides local protocols when animal welfare is at stake. Dennis met the manager's eyes steadily. Trust me on this, please. The reunion was carefully managed. Dennis supervised as the Star Hunters were moved into a shared habitat with reinforced barriers and multiple monitoring systems. The moment the transport cages opened, both creatures rushed to each other. They touched foreheads, entwined their tails, and made sounds of obvious relief. Within hours, their stress markers had normalized. Their injuries stopped worsening. They settled into a corner of the habitat together, refusing to separate, even for feeding. I've never seen bonded behavior that strong in apex predators. The facility veterinarian admitted, watching the pair sleep peacefully. We thought they were just compatible hunting partners. They're more than that. They're family. Dennis made detailed notes for the facility's records. Protocols need to account for emotional bonds, not just physical health. These creatures have complex social needs. Ignoring those needs causes harm. The veterinarian nodded slowly. Will you help us revise our protocols? That's why I'm here. Dennis spent 3 days at the facility working with staff to establish new procedures that accounted for social bonds, psychological needs, and individual personalities of apex predators. It was intensive work, but by the end, the staff showed genuine understanding of the principles behind the changes that on the final evening, Dennis sat with Nightshade in a quiet observation room, watching the Star Hunters rest peacefully together. Yara called with updates on other facilities, progress reports on trained specialists, and requests for future consultations. You're making a real difference, Yara said. The entire galaxy is changing how it thinks about apex predators. Because of you, because of Nightshade, Dennis corrected, scratching behind her ears. She took a chance on a scared maintenance worker hiding in the dark. That's where it all started. After ending the call, Dennis stayed in the quiet room with his friend. They traveled so far together, seen so many places, helped so many creatures. He thought about the tunnel bear on Dust Ridge. The incident that had driven him away from his old life. That bear hadn't gotten a second chance. But Nightshade had, the Void Stalkers had, the Star Hunters had. Maybe that was enough. Maybe you couldn't save everyone, but saving the ones you could was still worth the effort. What do you think? Dennis asked Nightshade quietly. Ready for the next one? Nightshade lifted her head and chirped softly, her eyes bright and alert. She was always ready, always willing to help. That was who she was. Not a monster, not a killing machine, just a living being who understood in her own way that they were doing something important. Dennis smiled and stood up. All right, then. Let's go see who needs us next. They walked through the quiet facility together. An apex predator and a human who'd learned to speak her language. Staff members they passed no longer looked at them with fear. They saw a partnership that had changed conservation across the galaxy. They saw proof that the most dangerous creatures in known space could become gentle friends with patience, respect, and understanding. The galaxy was vast. There were countless facilities still operating on old protocols. Thousands of apex predators still suffering from isolation and misunderstanding. The work would never truly be finished. But every creature they helped mattered. Every handler they trained would help dozens more. Every protocol they improved would prevent future suffering. Dennis had never wanted to be special. He just wanted to work quietly with animals and be left alone. But Nightshade had found him in that maintenance corridor 2 years ago and changed everything. She had chosen to trust him when she had every reason to see him as a threat. That trust was a gift Dennis had learned to pass forward. As they boarded their shuttle for the next destination, Dennis looked at Nightshade and remembered something his mother had told him long ago on Dust Ridge. The bravest thing you can do is sit down beside something dangerous and wait for it to trust you. His mother had been talking about the frontier wildlife that surrounded their colony. But the principle applied to so much more. To every creature in the galaxy that others had labeled as monsters, to every being that just needed someone patient enough to listen. Nightshade settled in her spot on the shuttle, her body relaxed and content. Dennis sat beside her and pulled up the next facility's files. Another challenge, another opportunity to help. Here we go again, he said softly. Nightshade's purr rumbled through the quiet shuttle. Agreement, contentment, readiness that they'd faced dangerous situations before. They'd solve whatever problems came next together, as they always had since that night in the maintenance corridor when an apex predator had tracked down the one human brave enough to see her as something more than a monster. Sometimes the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy just needed someone willing to sit quietly beside them. And sometimes humans with their strange ability to see past teeth and claws to the living being beneath were exactly the right species for that impossible job. The shuttle lifted off, carrying them toward the next facility, the next challenge. The next creature that needed understanding instead of fear. She'd given him purpose, and as they traveled through the stars, to believe that Dennis couldn't help but feel grateful that dangerous animals found him that night.